Let's talk about attributes. Attributes can be pretty confusing because in a lot of ways they're exactly the same as elements. But then the question arises as well, when should I use an attribute? When should I use an element? So let me start from the beginning. We know that the basic structure of XML is hierarchical. That hierarchy is expressed by parents and children. The parents are either attributes and elements. The children are either attributes, elements, or text nodes. Right? So we have those three basic types of things inside of XML: attributes, elements, and text nodes. So we know that a hierarchy consists of parents, and those parents are either elements and attributes, and children, and the children are elements, attributes, or text nodes. Text nodes can't have children, they're the end of the line. So the difference between an element and an attribute, and this is basically the only difference between an element and an attribute, is what kind of children it can have. An element can have attributes and text node children. An attribute can only have text node children. So what does that mean? That means that an attribute is pretty much the end of the line. The only thing after an attribute is a text node. So an attribute really can't be a major branch of the XML tree. An element can be a major branch of the XML tree. Other things like, for example, data type, same across elements and attributes. Well, there's a couple of other things. Because attributes live inside of the start tag of an element, that's where they're positioned, you can't have multiple attributes one after the same time with the same name. So I can only have one ID attribute. If I want to have a second one, I'm going to have to call it ID2 or ID3. And you can see why that's true. If I had multiple attributes all with the same name inside of an element start tag, I wouldn't know which was which, and there would be no way really of telling them apart. Although that's an avoidable problem, we avoid that in elements by just naming them element 1, element 2, element 3. It's just not allowed. So that's the kind of the logistics of it. Except for the fact that an attribute can't have children, they really have the same function. An element with a child attribute is expressing the fact that that child tag is a child. So if I have a person and the person has a name attribute, the name is the name of the child. If that person element has a name element under it instead of a name attribute, same exact logical relationship. So that's where the confusion comes in. The logical relationship between an element and a child, whether that child is an attribute or an element, is the same. A child attribute, a child element is still a child. So logically it represents this childness, right? And that's the basic structure of XML. So that means that I can choose, given that it's not going to repeat, given that it's not going to have children, I can choose whether to make my tag an element or an attribute with no difference in the logical structure of the XML file. So that's kind of a problem. You might want to say, well, how come? I mean, aren't there two different things? One's an attribute and an element, and the answer is really no. So that boils down to, or that brings us to really the main question, which is, if it's not on your mind now, at some point it really will be on your mind, which is, so what do I use? Do I use an element or do I use an attribute? So two ways I want to approach this issue. One is, well, before I even approach the issue, I want you to hopefully know by now that it's up to you. Whether you choose to use an element or an attribute is your design decision. The logical structure expressed is the same, and given the logistical things that I covered before, it's your choice. So there are people who eschew attributes altogether. You can't eschew elements, right? You have a root element, so you always have to have some elements in there. But you can say, I don't believe in attributes. I'm only going to have child elements, and the logical structure of your XML file would be exactly the same. So two ways of addressing this idea of when do I use attributes. One is from the standpoint of your own lineage. My lineage, as probably most of you, my lineage, as probably most of your lineages, is from HTML. HTML makes extensive use of attributes, and it purveys this kind of an idea about the stylistic usage of attributes. And that is, if the tag is very closely related to the other tag, if it's got a small amount of information in it, and it seems to be a modifier or a qualifier onto the tag, then it belongs as an attribute. So things like ID, CSS class, style attributes, the things that seem, and I really want to say seem, like they're related to the root tag, those are all attributes. And so that's kind of what I follow. You'll never see me using an ID as a child element because it feels like it's more closely associated with the element as an attribute than it would if it's a child tag, even though in reality it's not any more closely associated. Elements and attributes are exactly as closely associated with their parents as they're the same amount of association with their parents. Programmatically, if you end up in there really is no difference. There's a different set of commands for accessing attributes versus elements, but they're no more or less accessible if they're attributes or elements. The final thing to talk about is really logistic. In this class, we're going to use an XML IDE, and in that IDE, you have the ability to open and close tags. When you close tags, it means you're hiding all the child elements, but you don't hide the child attributes. And so when I close a tag, I can still see the attributes. That's very useful to me, and in a lot of cases, that's why I make something an attribute, because I want to see it even when the XML outline is closed up. Okay, so we have this notion of an attribute. An attribute is a child of an element. It has all the same constraints on it as an element does. It's allowed to have text node children and no other kind of children. The reasons why you use it are stylistic, like you feel that you should use an attribute. They're also logistic, like I want to have all of my attributes still showing when I close up the tag. Programmatically, they work exactly the same. Logically, they work exactly the same.